Hello everyone, it's Oskar the Virtual Fact Shooter here, and I hope this is going to be a quick one, but the workshop I'm going to be teaching at Winterkamp this weekend is just too much fun not to do a video handout for. Quite a long time ago I made a video on the etymology of a lot of the terminology used in Hans Leküchner's fight book on the use of the langes messer or long knife. And a pretty big part of that was terms for techniques and positions that were related to fortifications and siegecraft. And now the day has finally come that I'll get to run a workshop based on those ideas. Obviously, names such as Lugensland, Bastei and Zwinger were chosen because the readers expected familiarity with these fortifications in Leküchner's hometown of Nuremberg. But perhaps there is something more going on here as well, and we can use this fortification-related terminology to actually learn a bit more about fencing. And we'll be doing exactly that to try and figure out how we can force an opponent to engage us in the windings, or perhaps more commonly known as the bind. First though, let's see where this workshop fits in with the entire fight book. Hans Leküchner wrote a pretty damn huge book, but at least it has some form of internal consistency. The first part is about how to attack your opponent when they're in all kinds of different positions, usually resulting in some sort of a winding. And the second part deals with what to do when this somehow doesn't result in a workable bind, which is then followed by a couple of solutions for situations that only happen with messer and not with longsword, and then the whole manuscript finishes with an in-depth description of the actual windings and what to do when your opponent doesn't quite want to play along. This workshop mostly fits in with the first section on how to force your opponent to engage you in a bind. So, on to the actual workshop. Time to besiege some cities. Most medieval warfare did not consist of pitched battles or protracted sieges, but rather of a war of movement, with fast raids by cavalry and mounted infantry, and many smaller skirmishes over minor strategic points. One German word for this type of skirmishing is Zecken, and one of the ideas about the Zeckruhr is that this type of cut at shallow targets can be opposed to the Krieg, or the full-on war, which describes working from the bind. One definite truth about medieval warfare is that winning through successful skirmishing is much more preferable than taking the risk of a pitched battle or the prohibitive cost of a siege. Moreover, failing to address opposing skirmishing forces could often spell disaster for an army. In fencing, this means that if you can win an exchange with a cheap and easy shot, it would not only be rude not to take the opening that is offered, but not doing so will make it way harder to win that exchange. A great example of this is when your opponent fences from a position where the shoulders are square onto you and the hand is in front of the body. Not only is that hand an easier target, but instead going for a deep target like the head will make it way easier for your opponent to just extend their hand a little further and just hit you. So if you see an opponent take such a stance, you can use the war of movement, the Zecken, to win that exchange quickly and without risk. If your opponent pulls away their hand, it should be super easy to just continue your movement into a thrust to the body. To demonstrate how a good position solves this, your partner takes a rather haphazard version of the position called Lugensland or Watchtower, just like so. And it should be pretty easy for you to just sneak in a couple of hand hits. Now, let your partner just think about how to prevent those hits from happening, and chances are that they will come up with something very close to what is shown in the fight book. And that brings us to the vier leger, or four positions. The word leger can alternatively be translated as an encampment or a siege camp, because they offer both a great defensive position as well as a place to launch your own assaults from. These four positions are called Lugensland, Bastei, Stier and Eber, or the Watchtower, the Bastion, the Bull and the Boar. And they fit all the criteria that I think are crucial for making a fencing position work for this. 1. They keep the hand safe. Getting fingers chopped off is very embarrassing. 2. They don't have the hand in front of the body. And this means that if someone does attack the hand, removing it doesn't provide a lovely follow-up target. And 3. They provide solid defense against most basic attacks to the deep targets, such as direct or compound attacks, and at the same time they offer great offensive and counterattack options. Tweaking any lazy version of these four positions will change the preferred target for your opponent from the hand to your head, at which point you can very easily just wind and land a thrust. So, good structure pays off. Switching to the viewpoint of the attacking army again, I think we have to settle in for a long siege. So let's see what the handbook has to say about sieges. There's 4 battlements all told, to conquer, take and hold. Be aware of the sentry before you make your entry. What I think this means is that you can see your opponent as some sort of a city that you're trying to take by siege. They have, for instance, a watchtower, they have a bastion, and of course the targets that you're trying to hit are the battlements, and it is these battlements that we should try to take. There's always watchers patrolling these battlements, so a good strategy would be to attack where they're spread most thinly, or concentrate your forces to overwhelm them. For this exercise, you attack the 4 battlements, meaning the left and right upper part of your opponent, which is above the natural waist, and the left and right lower part, which is below the natural waist, and kind of includes the upper legs, but no lower than that. For this exercise, you can agree with your partner on the number of cuts you will be making for each repetition, 4, 6, 8, something to that effect. But the most important thing is to actually focus on trying to go for those battlements, those targets, and not for the opponent's blade. You can of course make all your cuts into a winding if you already know how to do that. And if you have some gear on, you can even speed up the drill and try to actually hit your partner on those battlements. It can really help as well to attack the next battlements where your partner will have difficulty rushing their watcher, or more literally their parry, to the next target in time. The next exercise is a slightly more formal way to practice the windings, the Krieg or war. This exercise, which is great for getting the repetitions of the mechanics of windings in, will start by you winding to a left high hanging or hanging guard. And your partner sets that aside, and then you go to the right high hanging. And after this is parried, you go to right lower hanging, and when this in turn gets set aside, you go to the left low hanging. Following this one through gets you to the start position again, and you can keep doing this until the end of days if you so choose. This is ultimately where you want to get to, but I'm sure that an opponent will have a thing or two to say about that, unfortunately. So how do we force this winding game upon them? Obviously not with a direct attack, because this is bound to fail. No, this is where the Verborgenhauen or hidden cuts come in. In longsword, all of the Lager get countered by one of these cuts, and with Messer this is almost the case. Without having to resort to weird things like long point and hanging point that make Messer just a little bit different, let's just take one hidden cut where we do get a winding in the end, the Entrüsthau. The word entrüsten means to bother or anger someone, but since it counters the Lugensland, the watchtower, I think the translation beleaguering cut would be poetically justifiable. You start from a low loading guard, with the thumb on the flat of the Messer and the point towards the ground. Then make a circular cut into roughly the horizontal plane, which incidentally also ends in the left high hanging, with the blunt edge leading. The nice thing about this cut is that it counters any simple action from the Lugensland, be that a parry riposte or a direct attack. Now, it would be kind of sad to explain to you how cool the Lager are and then leave you to get owned by the Entrüsthau, so let's give the Lugensland person a chance to take back the initiative. If you parry an Entrüsthau, your opponent is likely going to be cutting around with another Entrüsthau from the other side. When this happens, wind your Messer with the grip high and the point low. You will parry the second Entrüsthau and be ready to deliver a nice thrust from the bind. This is pretty cool, since this will also counter a follow-up into resting. And here comes the truly cool stuff. Having forced your opponent to attack your deep target with an Entrüsthau, simply by taking a good Lugensland position, you can take over the initiative with a winding. So performing this counter will allow you to follow up with the Krieg game you played earlier. Start in Lugensland. You can move around a bit if you want, and then when your partner attacks with the Entrüsthau, perform the counter and try to land the thrust. Your coach may attempt to set this aside, at which point you can follow through with the war until you manage to land the thrust at any of the battlements. Congratulations, the fort is now yours. And that's it. Thanks everyone for watching and or participating in the workshop. And if you'd like to see more of this, why don't you check out Patreon, just like all of these amazing people have already done. So if you have any questions, let me know, and otherwise I'll see you all for the next one. Okay, doei.